You are listening to Talking Star Wars.
Hello, Star Wars fans. I'm Alex,
And I'm Connor.
and today we are going to talk about Star Wars.
Okay,
Specifically, this is episode 90, our 2025 Pride episode, Queer Representation in Star Wars.
that is correct. So what brings us here to this topic, Alex?
So, one, it is Pride Month in June of 2025 when this is being recorded. And it has also appeared in the world where I believe representation of the LGBTQ community is more important than ever, particularly in such a wide-reaching mega franchise as Star Wars, which has such a cultural influence, which has such a large impact and influence on our culture today.
And you can kind of see the progression of how representation exists in Star Wars because, like many other franchises, it was not well represented to begin with. And then as time goes on, we have seen certain choices to and not to represent just queer identity in Star Wars media. So it's an interesting topic and interesting subject to evaluate Star Wars on.
Yeah. And to make the thesis for Connor and I very clear, we are pro representation of queer individuals in Star Wars and in general. I myself am an ally of the queer community, and I just believe that positive, queer people exist, and so it makes sense that they should also be present in the media in science fiction that is its own universe, but also, in being influenced by the culture within which it's taking place.
And as a member of the community, I would also like to exist. So, in short, it's something that we both favor as being important for not only ourselves, but for culture at large.
Yeah. And so what Connor and I are not going to do today is do an exhaustive list of every single gay, lesbian, trans, or queer individual in the Star Wars universe. So we don't need to take an inventory of representation. That would be very clinical. But we are going to provide examples. And what we would like to do is see how representation of those with queer identities have changed for the better over the course of the Star Wars franchise, areas where we've seen great growth and where Disney has been cowardly in depicting in more mainstream visual media.
Star Wars hasn't had the best history of representing anyone who wasn't a white male. I believe there's only two women with speaking roles in the original trilogy. Um, but
And
I
one
want
black,
to,
and don't forget, only one black man.
and only one black man with a speaking role. Uh, I think it's still interesting to say that culturally, I think this is something that started almost as a critique or a joke, but has since become identities for these characters. But C-3PO and R2-D2 have been queer coded for quite some time. Um, I think that's interesting to look into, whether that be just because of them being droids or them being sort of uh, fussy protectors of our heroes. But it's something that's just worth noting that an identity can be considered clear and even not be considered, or what should I say? An identity can, yeah, an identity can still be considered queer if the character is a science fiction invention. Um, Something that I find interesting, almost akin to people noting the Babadook as being a queer idol. Um, there's some comfort in knowing that there's some facsimile of representation in someone like C-3PO, who their protective, worrying nature comes across in a certain way.
I would agree in that to start with, we do not have, I think, any openly queer characters at all in the original Star Wars trilogy. How,
Yeah.
nor do we have, I would say, negative depictions of queer characters. This is in the 70s. It's quite possible you could have had the gay caricature character who's just there is to be flamboyant and be the butt of jokes.
Mhm.
Um, or the lesbian character who then meets a man and then suddenly wants to just have children. So we avoid those awful 70s and 80s tropes in the original trilogy, for which we remain grateful. But it is true that there is not any overt. depictions of queer identity in the original Star Wars. However, I am all for taking queer readings of characters in ways that it makes sense of the universe that they're in. And you could absolutely read C-3PO and R2-D2 that way. Whether they are life partners, I'm putting that in air quotes, or have some kind of romantic connection is up to each viewer. But I personally am a fan of seeing them as committed partners. I mean, the level of distress that C-3PO experiences when R2 is wounded, the extent to which R2 goes to repair and save C-3PO, the level of bickering together. They're like an old married couple. And in fact, they may be an old married couple in whatever sense
Right.
that means for droids.
And droids are, I would say they're gendered. We have, oh, he's a, just a protocol droid. There are some droids that are overtly female. These are, it's hard to argue that these are not male droids.
Yeah,
R2-D2, I would
and
say, is a little bit nebulous, but we have astromechs that are more depicted within the trappings of being female.
and I would say you have other droids like Chopper who revels in a male gender identity despite being an astromech droid.
Mhm.
Uh, and being agender is also part of being the queer community as well. So
So
if
that's
a
an option for the droids.
yes,
Whereas others
but
like L3 and Solo are pretty overtly female.
that is correct. You even have droids like Z in Jedi Survivor, who was also uses a female voice and identifies as female in that way, responds to she/her pronouns. I'm trying to think if there are any non-gender droids. I mostly would go by it when not going by
Yeah.
he or she. Not a lot of they non-binary droids. Um,
I would refer to IG-88 as a they just because I would be so afraid to misgender that particular droid.
IG-11 probably in the same vein,
Yeah.
though. Again, I don't think it has this. Something can be an that can be a pronoun for someone who does not identify with human or alien gender norms. But as you can see, we're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel here for representation in the original trilogy when um, we're looking for, I mean, reading between the lines, looking at subtext. There is no overt textual queer representation.
And we don't necessarily get that in the prequel trilogy as they stand alone, if I'm correct.
That is correct. We have more characters that when expanded universe material was filled out that are canonically queer. But I mean, Phantom Menace came out in 1999, and then Revenge of this came out in 2005, and this was before Oberfell v. Hodges, just 10 years ago, that legalized gay marriage across the United States, which is again where Star Wars is primarily produced. So, and it does still, we do largely avoid kind of like queer caricatures. Probably the closest we get during the prequel era is Zero the Hutt, who is flamboyant and some people have found offensive. It
Mhm.
turns out it's just a flamboyant straight Hutt. Um,
Which is
what?
interesting. Interesting, like just interesting coding for a character. Yeah,
Yep.
it's not
But
not the most respectful. I mean, if you're giving a, I don't know if I think it's disrespectful in general to just give a character queer coding, regardless of if they are or not in the story, if it's for the sake of comedy. Like, oh, here's this hut that sounds like Truman Capote, and he's our main villain in the Clone Wars movie. Another reason why the Clone Wars movie might not have been the best launching pad for that series.
uh, I agreed, and I would, yeah, correct 100%. Um, so I think Zero the Hutt is the closest we get to what is an offensive caricature of a gay character.
Yeah,
I think it was done for it's like we're going to use some mild queer coding to make them funny, which is the worst cultural thing to take out of
absolutely.
sort of queer culture from that time. But then I think then later they realized it's like okay, we're going to tone that down, give him a girlfriend, and then he's going to die for being terrible. So that was the arc for Zero the Hutt.
I'll take care of it in
Um,
later text.
yeah, I would say the closest we get for overt queer coding would be with Ahsoka in season 7 of the Clone Wars. where
Is that with
she
the two sisters arc?
correct, where she may or may not have had a romantic interest in either of them, and then also was implied to have romantic interest in the novel that also took place immediately following that, the Ahsoka novel, came out in 2018 or so.
And that itself brings up the question of the Jedi and their detachment. Um, it's because the Jedi are so secular, it's almost like the priesthood, where they take a vow of celibacy, where it's not here's how I was born, and here are what my natural inclinations are. It's more so here is the coda that we, or here's no, here's the code that we follow, and that just so happens to include no relationships, no attachments, nothing like that.
Yeah, I think the Jedi are certainly, an ascetic monk-like institution, increasingly so in the modern era of Star Wars as seen depicted, where they're most dogmatic right before they are destroyed by Palpatine. But we'll get into this a little bit later. But the High Republic period, set a couple hundred years before a Phantom Menace, um, at least in how it's been depicted, is full of queer characters, including among the Jedi Order. And again,
Yeah.
it's not like the gay Jedi are given a free pass to form attachments. They struggle in the same way that Anakin Skywalker does with his love for Padme.
Mhm.
Um, but for example, we'll touch on several trans Jedi or non-binary Jedi that the Order is very accepting of that because it's like that's your true nature. Now don't fall to the dark side.
Yeah, it's almost I mean, with the High Republic, that is past original prequel and sequel trilogies, and it's the most contemporary kind of body of work that we have to look at. So, the fact that any kind of queer ideology is present, embraced, accepted, isn't surprising at all. And I know that there have been retcons to make former characters within previous materials queer coded. Um, Taking a look at that, I mean, it took until the Disney era to make uh, Lando definitively pansexual.
Yes, though
Um,
he was certainly the most flamboyant character in not in a negative way, but like had a sense of style. Billy Boyd just oozes style in the original trilogy.
I'll
But
bleep this out, but he's the only character in Star Wars that, other than Anakin, we know f***s. He just has that. He has that swagger. He has that charisma. Maybe Han to a lesser degree. I feel like Han has missed more of his shots than he's made. Um,
yeah,
but Lando definitively just has that je ne sais quoi. So
yeah.
when we get to Solo, we have some inferences that there may be some romantic link between himself and his droid L3, particularly when L3 meets her demise, and he is heartbroken over that.
Yeah, well, Connor and I often take a what kind of a Watsonian look at sort of the world, um, where we're trying to do everything in universe with how it's happening in Star Wars. We have to acknowledge the Holmesian view as well, where uh, this is taking place in the context of the culture that's producing the media and was, I'm putting in air quotes again, acceptable at the time. And this is why I
Absolutely.
think you see increasingly positive and inclusive representations of queer characters as time goes on, which is the kind of progress we'd like to see. But
I
to
will
continue
still
on,
say that one note of Lando and this droid probably have a relationship. It was played for a laugh, where
mhm.
L3 says, "Oh, you're going to have to do that thing again because one of her converters is clogged." Um, yeah, it rides the line for me. It's not as bad as Zero the Hutt, but it's also used for humor other than just being part of the firmament of the story.
Yes, it's because it's someone written by someone who doesn't really understand the culture within which they're writing a character, where it's again, you know, it's not a very mature look at sexuality or relationships as a whole. And again, you don't need to be super serious all the time, but don't punch down with your humor is typically a good rule. Um, because that movie came out during the sequel era, episode 7 through 9. And honestly, there's like not a lot of grappling with any kind of um, sexuality or queer themes at all in the sequel trilogy, other
Even though
than
they built it up and they have the potential for it, they don't pursue it.
yeah, I'm gonna say with the change, we're gonna look at some other types of media where queer representation had already been in existence for a couple of decades
Hmm.
in video games specifically, and then we get to the sequel trilogy, and this is I would call this the cowardly period for Disney,
Yes.
where they waffled like, and the people correctly identified that there was enormous chemistry with the characters of Finn and Poe.
Mhm.
And I, for one, as you have seen in several of our previous episodes, would have supported. It didn't need it, but if they had decided to do a romantic relationship with Finn and Poe, I felt that was the same. Would have been successful in the same way that Leia and Han's relationship was successful in our primary trio. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. They
but then,
the scene in The Force Awakens where they reunite after being apart in the beginning of the film, after Finn thinks that Poe is dead. Um, just it's my jacket. Keep it. You look good in that jacket. It's impossible not to read some sort of subtext in those lines. We don't have that subtext in other Star Wars films.
and you see though we're still relying on subtext. There's no like, this is my boyfriend Poe, this is my boyfriend Finn, which we will get to that level of explicit relationships later. But we're
Mhm.
still like, we can imply it, but we can't actually depict it because we'll alienate too many people. But we can't have a black man be the primary love interest for Rey either. So it's all about representation. And then of course people panic and they gave Finn and Poe each a female quasi love interest moving forward of the opposite gender. And then they gave Rey the kiss with Kylo Ren, even though for that she'd shown no romantic inclination towards anyone whatsoever. So,
Right. Yeah, and it's people like to blame, oh, Chinese audiences don't want to see that. And America or American production companies are afraid because, if they have a overtly queer relationship, then no one's gonna want to see it overseas. And I think, they can take that fear and reflect it to internal audiences in America. Because I know that they're trying to hit all of their bases and they don't want to um, exclude groups that will be very loud and dissenting. Because, as you have said, no one hates Star Wars more than a Star Wars fan. And I cannot imagine just the civil war of Star Wars fans alongside different political bends who would get into a tizzy if there was an overtly queer relationship in Star Wars. Maybe in the future that will not be the case, but I can definitely see Disney thinking along those lines back when the sequels were made.
agreed. Um, but at the same time, if you're allowing bigotry to dictate what you're going to put in your media franchise, you're a coward.
Oh, yes.
So,
Hollywood is full of
um,
them. I don't think there's any. I mean, the only people in Hollywood who aren't cowards are making avant-garde, strange, challenging films, and Star Wars is unfortunately not like within that realm. It's not supposed to be a challenging media. It's supposed to be wish fulfillment and
I think if you're writing sci-fi at all or fantasy, you still need to be doing something interesting, and you
Mhm.
need to be in this cultural zeitgeist. And I like to compare this chart sometimes, where it's like when interracial marriage was made legal in the U.S., like less than half the population thought it should be, and
Mhm.
now but we're still like we got to silence the bigots, and then it quickly, became very accepted. Right now, we have more than half the population that thinks it should be legal, and it is, and we
Mhm.
still people are questioning its depiction. Yeah, the people who opposed publicly showing Uhura and Spock kissing on TV
Mhm.
were not on the right side of history, and
No,
neither are any of the people that are saying we can't have queer characters in our Star Wars.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think that it's not just Disney, but Disney is a part of this cowardice that is a part of Hollywood. Um, and as we talk about later depictions, they're starting to warm up to it more. But I think our thesis of this episode is that within films and TV, they need to continue this representation and embrace it and depict it and not just skirt around the subtext.
Yeah, I
So
would say so. Again, the visual media has been the slowest and most cowardly of Disney's media, especially the movies. We have one depiction of a gay relationship, and that is between Commander DeAcy and an unnamed mechanic character in The Rise of Skywalker, in a
mhm.
scene that could easily be edited out for international
Yes.
audiences. That is the only area in one of the um, currently 11 canonical Star Wars movies where we see a um, depicted visually any kind of queer character that is coded as queer on the screen. We have other depiction of characters that in other media are revealed to be queer or trans, such as Admiral Holdo, um, several
Mhm.
of Padme's handmaidens, and
I believe
others.
Sabe from Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, so yeah, several of them
Hmm.
are. Two of them end up married to each other once their term of service has ended. Um, but other media was far ahead of the movies as far as depicting queer relationships. I would say most recently, just going down the list, Andor has Vel and Cinta,
Hmm.
um, who are two human women in a relationship. You also have in the Acolyte, you have two women who used dark force magic to
Hmm.
conceive children together, and were obviously also in a romantic marriage and relationship, calling them their mothers of their children. And then you also have in Skeleton Crew, just very casually, one of our main characters has two mothers. So, uh, and it wasn't treated with anything abnormal. And that kind of casual, this is not abnormal and just happens, is, Connor, you've told me you also prefer this. That's the kind of representation you're looking for on a side character.
Yes, it's representation that doesn't call attention. It doesn't, it's not like, oh, Lando, you're going to have to do that thing you did to help unclog me. No, it's very much within the DNA of the story. It's not really pointed at, but it's there. I think it works very naturally with Vel and Cinta in Andor because they are characters a part of an ensemble. And like they're in a show like that that's so multifaceted in terms of who it's following with its story, they are just part of the wallpaper, and their story matters just as much as everyone else's. And then I think with Acolyte, we have Anastasia, who is one of the mothers of the two twins that we have, and Mother Coral. And I appreciate that they are in, from one perspective, even though they're, you know, vilified, we get to see that that's not so the case. They almost are coded as like these pre-Night Sister, Night Mother archetypal characters, but we learn a little bit more about their culture and we learn a little bit more about um, their point of view. And I, the moment where Anastasia starts to shift, and I think it's May that she starts to affect. It could have been Osha because they're twins, and it's been a year since I've seen this show, and my memory is not as strong as it was. It it looked like before the Jedi decided to kill Anastasia, she was merely trying to make herself and her daughter visible in order to escape. So rather than the villains they were originally portrayed to be, they are just human. They're just characters. They're just people who are trying to survive and thrive in the galaxy. So I think that these representations are much more important, whether they be just, we're not going to shine a great light on this because in Andor, everyone's equal as far as the importance of their storyline. Where Acolyte, it's more focused on that. It's an entirely different view of the Force that we get to see. It's not just Jedi or Sith, or necessarily Night Mother.
But I would even say, though, I mean, it should also be open to having villainous characters who are also happen to be queer, but their queerness is not intrinsic to their villainy. It's not
Mhm.
like the the depraved bisexual, crazed villain from the 80s. Don't need to go back to that. But at the same time, like canonically, Wilhuff Tarkin is probably gay. And that didn't, that's not a reason he blew up Alderaan. It just happens to be a part of his character. And in fact, his sexuality is the least important part of him being an awful person.
The thought that Tarkin has any sexuality is one of the most terrifying ideas. I don't want to think about him in any intimate relationship because you know it's going to be one-sided, it's going to be toxic. Um, it's just not going to end well
Yeah.
for
Well,
the other participant in that relationship.
yeah, we never really get a sense. That's before his novel, which does get into his head. We never really get a sense of him as a person. We see him in his professional capacity as a
Mhm.
mass murdering Nazi. But um, the fact that he um, happened to perhaps have a gay stormtrooper lover, not a not the reason he's evil. Just it was like these kinds of things happen,
Mhm. And
and
it's
this.
just everyone has their own nature, and it's not good, bad, or otherwise. It's just their nature.
So that sort of takes us through sort of the more modern shows as well. Um, Thinking through all of our Visions episodes from various animators, and I don't. There's not a whole lot of like they're all so short that there's not really
Mhm.
any depiction of any kind of significant romantic relationship that I can recall.
Yeah, unless it's
Um,
about, characters who are lovers. I think there was one where there
there's
was a Jedi trying to protect someone that he loved and he went to the dark side.
Yep, that was the last episode of season one, and then
Yeah.
the Village Bride. There's a couple getting married, so
Mhm.
but also I can't think of any negative representations either. But then I would say, looking at another aspect of media, if you're good to switch over, Connor, is we can also look at how queer relationships and characters have been depicted in video games.
Sure. So I can't remember
So,
any classic video games, but I believe you've talked about Knights of the Old Republic before.
yeah, I mean, it takes a while to get to video games that are telling an original story, not just a remake of the movies in some way, such as like a Rogue Squadron. And again, you're not really delving in deep into characters in those original games. But one of the first story-rich games that set in the Star Wars universe was Knights of the Old Republic, and this is an example of early censorship against
Mhm.
queer relationships. In that there is a lesbian character, Juhani, a Cathar, who had a fully written romance with a female main character in that game, and a lot of it was cut out, dumbing out of the game files because
Interesting.
um, it was not considered acceptable for a teen game at the time to have a gay relationship. There are like mods and things that restore what was cut from the game, and it was like cut like almost right before release is what I believe. So Juhani is still canonically into women, and was one of the first video game gay characters depicted in the Star Wars universe, but is also a sign of how that could be censored. I would to the degree that Knights of the Old Republic 2, there are companions that are exclusive. If you're a male main character, you get a female companion. And then if you're a woman playing a woman, you get a male companion who's also an option to be in a romantic relationship with. So it's like we're going to eliminate as many potential queer relationships as we can. And I don't blame Obsidian for that, who produced the game. I think that might have been a dictate from after people freaked out about Juhani in the first Knights of the Republic.
Which is
But then by
unfortunate.
the time SWOTOR comes around, Star Wars: The Old Republic, which is the MMO, it's still ongoing. Um, I have not played it myself. But my understanding is that there's plenty of queer relationships between your companions and yourself, regardless of her gender.
Are there any other classic games in Star Wars that delve into queer representation, or is that more something modern?
It's more something modern. I mean, more modern to even get like heavy story and character based games other than Knights of the Old Republic.
Hmm.
You get things like Jedi Academy and The Force Unleashed that are legends as well. And again, I suppose thinking about this, yeah, The Force Unleashed, the main character falls in love with a woman,
Hmm.
and he's the angry white guy. Um, I
That
mean, not that there's
describes
anything
so
wrong.
many, so many video game protagonists.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that, but he's a very typical video game protagonist.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so it really takes until sort of the canon reboot. Not that EA has done a great job of um, depicting or having lots of Star Wars games. Now that they've recently lost the license, but more recently, you have had a great deal of more queer relationships, particularly in one of the more recent Star Wars games from 2003. You have Jedi Survivor, which has a boatload of people that you meet on your primary area of Rambler's Reach, um, where you can help um, your Twi'lek archaeologist Toa find someone to fall in love with. Moran is a morose who just separated from his husband. He's a morose Pantoran, and then there's the several other couples in there, both queer and otherwise, just a variety of different uh, uh, identities present in Jedi Survivor, and it's the partner of the main character, Cal Marin, is herself queer, just is in a relationship with a man, but does not erase her identity as a queer female presenting character.
I find it interesting that with you can take a look at video games and take a look at books and how there is, I don't know, there's such more flexibility than in film and television. And it's probably, I thought at one point video games had surpassed visual media as a means of entertainment. Um, I don't know. I don't know if film and TV are just stuck in a point where it's just not as accepted, where the audience doesn't accept it as much.
Well,
Um,
well, if you want, I have some opinions on that about why a depiction in a book or a video game might be more, I'm putting in air quotes, acceptable than like a tentpole movie. I
please
mean,
do.
because I mean, I think you're still talking big money for a big video game
Okay.
and big merchandising for all of it. But a movie is one a collective experience to be able to see it in a movie theater. So
Mhm.
it's not something like that's happened like personally in your home a lot of the time. The movie is being seen in a group, and also it can be seen by anyone, even casually. Whereas you're not getting a casual enjoyer to go play a 50-hour video game like Jedi Survivor. Um, and despite what some you know people might try to say, "Well, oh, gamers for white dudes who just want to shoot a bunch of people, shoot people in Call of Duty." Like
Right.
video gaming is actually largely the culture is very progressive and accepting and has lots of great depictions in that. So people who don't want to see that kind of representation are in the minority in that greatly growing demographic.
Mhm.
So I think there's a huge audience that wants to see those kind of interactive stories. But whereas in a video game, it's like, oh, I'm going to ignore that part of it and just go play this personally. If it's on a visual media, it's like everyone just saw that and it can be clipped and put online and talked about on the news. And I think, there's just people of a certain generation who are never going to go read a Star Wars book or play a Star Wars video game, but maybe they'll go see the Star Wars movie. And then all of their grandkids saw two women kissing. This is a big issue. Whereas if, oh, 20 hours into Jedi Survivor, there's a couple of queer relationships, they're never going to get that far. So
Mhm.
I think it's the matter of how accessible is the queer content to the average boomer. Might be my assessment.
Yeah, and I mean the average boomer is not going to be playing Star Wars video games. They're not going to be playing video games in general. That makes sense. It'll be interesting to see just as time and generations shift, um, how the balance goes. When it comes to books, it seems like
Books have typically flown a little bit under the radar, in especially speculative fiction, as far as their ability to depict queer relationships. And Star Wars has relatively recently got on that train. As I mentioned, if you're good, Connor, we can dive into the most recent media push by the Star Wars franchise, which is the High Republic.
as far as the High Republic goes, what have you seen? What have you read?
Well, to start with, just books in general, probably the first main character of a media series, a book-based media series that was gay, was Dr. Aphra. We have a lot to say on this topic.
Dr. Aphra.
Yeah, so before the High Republic started in, I think, 2019, 2020, the biggest, I think, sort of queer representation media that Star Wars had produced And this was alongside our cowardly area in films, because Dr. Aphra started being published in 2015, 2016. Yeah, it's Dr. Aphra, who is very gay and very amoral, and is a disaster. It's been described by several queer people I've talked to as a disaster lesbian, which is apparently a thing. Yeah, in that she is a henchman for Darth Vader before she tries to then leave that employment. She swindles, steals, kills, makes bad decisions all the time, and is also primarily dates and is into women. Though, much like Lando encountering a string of his exes, or Jack Sparrow going into Tortuga and getting slapped by someone he slept with. Aphra is that, but the lesbian version, where she keeps encountering people that she was in relationship with that she, screwed out of a job or left for dead, and has to reckon with that. So it's probably one of the more, I would say, thorough depictions of a queer character, in that she headlines her own, you know, approaching more than 100 issues at this point about her. Some of her side characters have entered visual medium, like Black Chrysanthemum, one of her own henchmen, has now joined up with Boba Fett in the Book of Boba Fett. Yeah,
She's had
and
toys made of her.
mm-hmm, yeah, and that her relationships are explicit, not necessarily in that like that's lots of nudity involved or anything, but like she is sleeping with these other women, and they use the words like my ex-girlfriend and my partner, and she's kissing other people. This is not leaving it to subtext. It's like, oh, my life partner, using the kind of weasel language sometimes do. It's like, no, Aphra is gay, and
Yeah.
she is probably, unapologetically so. And while lots of people judge Aphra and dislike Aphra for lots of very valid reasons in universe, none of them are for sexuality. All of them because she's kind of an awful person.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, you could describe Han Solo in very much the same way as a disaster man, as a disaster of a person who is left, uh, I'm sure, in canon and legends alike, many lovelorn women in his wake, um, and has just a certain level of toxicity when entering any relationships. Um, so it's that idea of yes, you have this character who is living a problematic life, and she's a lesbian, but she's not living not living a problematic life because she's a lesbian. She just so happens to be um, just as the same as Han Solo as a heterosexual man, also happens to be a disaster.
Yeah, I think Aphra was even described as like a dark version of Han Solo, where instead of falling in with Luke Skywalker, she fell in with Darth Vader,
Mhm.
and has had the opposite impact on her.
Right.
So, before we get High Republic, that is really what I wanted to focus on. Is just mention Aphra, kind of a queer icon in Star Wars, ongoing comic series about her for 10 years now. So, she deserves to show up in some kind of physical media or visual media sometime soon, or a video game or something, because she um, is awful, in the best way. In that, you're like, please, Aphra, make the right decision. Um, to get back together with your girlfriend. She was good for you. So we'll see. She's fun to watch. Uh, but she kind of like in the same way where it's like you have to have Aphra before you can then have the High Republic. You have to have a broadly accepted and really cool, I think, female queer character
Mhm.
in a Star Wars comic before you can do something what like the High Republic is.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to go on a whole list of all the queer characters in the High Republic, because the list on Wikipedia is more than 200 characters long. So if you like to go look, you can. But the High Republic, set in sort of this more idealistic age, 200 years before the Phantom Menace, though despite with lots of stuff going on, is so full of characters of such diversity, both appearance-wise, species, race, and sexuality and queer depiction. We have non-binary Jedi like Kantam Sai, who's a Jedi master who studied under Yoda. You have asexual characters like Leox, the pilot of the vessel. You have um, uh, a trans Padawan youngling who it just mentioned casually, like she decided that she no longer matched her name and her pronouns when she was 6 or 7. So the Jedi were like, "Oh, okay, we're still in ascetic order, so you move over to the female presenting dorms now, and here's what's your new name? Okay, we're changing your name everywhere it is."
Right.
So,
Just don't forget
um,
vow of celibacy. And,
but
everyone's treated
I
the
mean,
same in that regard.
well, again, in the High Republic too, it's less celibacy and it's more about attachment. Again,
Oh,
part of
that's
the High
fair.
Republic
Yeah.
period is we see more of the dogmatic, stricter interpretations of Jedi doctrine starting to take
Mhm.
hold. But some of the steamiest action ever in Star Wars also takes place in the High Republic. Uh, between there's both queer and heterosexual relationships and thruples and lots of different relationships, some of which get, I said, quite you know positive in their depiction of sexuality,
Mhm.
including between Jedi. One of the most explicit sex scenes I've read in a Star Wars thing was in Temptations of the Force between Elzar Mann and Avar Kriss, who really shouldn't have been sleeping together if the Order had a say, but they're both Jedi Masters and they're doing whatever they want.
Sure.
And it's depicted as a positive thing for both of them.
Interesting.
So we also, in a relatively recent comic episode, we have Lula Pilasova and Zine Morala, two women, one of whom left the Jedi Order because she wanted to marry her girlfriend, which she then does, and including their uh, everyone is very supportive of this, even the former her Jedi she no longer works with, and there's a whole issue just dedicated to their wedding, and it is fabulous. Um, Fabulous in that it's been depicted, not fabulous in they are like um, flamboyant characters. They're both battle hardened survivors of a war against the Nihil.
That reminds me of the Luke Skywalker and Mara Jade's Legends marriage that got its entire own graphic novel.
Yep, same with Lula and Zine. Yeah, and plenty of other gay, lesbian, and queer relationships present throughout the High Republic. Um, we have Crash Ongwa and her girlfriend. We have Jordana Sparkburn and her girlfriend. We have um, a member of the Graff family and his husband, who they were an arranged political marriage, but then fall desperately in love with each other. And again, this does show, which I mentioned, about twice as many female-female relationships as male-male relationships. This is, I would say, due to, again, cultural undercurrents where um, women are less threatening when they're gay as they are than men are in the cultural zeitgeist of the US, where most of these stories are produced. But that is also changing, and we are getting. There was a adorable story in the Phase 3 of the High Republic, where it was two Jedi Padawans who are both men, and were very into each other. And then Master Comac Vitus, also a very gay, very powerful Jedi Master, who's like, I'm not going to act in any of this, but these men are fine.
So, taking a look at how prevalent queer identity is in the High Republic, I mean, I think we can both agree if they allow that to reflect slightly on some future Star Wars media, visual media, that would be great.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be like this is our super special episode with queer characters. That is the worst thing to do.
Yeah.
The best way, you have the casually where you just have, you know, oh, Leia's parents are Bail Organa and Breha Organa, and like it was the same way that it was in Skeleton Crew, where this one character has two moms and no one questions it. That's just how it is.
And both
Oh
had dialogue and both were actual characters. It makes me think of the Doctor Strange sequel where the female multi-dimensional character there just so happened to have two moms, but they were only featured in one scene. That could easily be cut out of the story. Um,
yeah, I
Representation
don't
should
want to.
not be easily cut out.
Yeah, like Cinta and Vel and Andor, like
Mhm.
the fact that they're in a relationship is an important part of both of their characters because it's giving them
Mhm.
both motivation to do what they do. You can't easily remove it, but also no one's commenting on you're so brave for being lesbians in the rebellion. Like no one cares. Um,
It's
the
just seen
like
as part of the world. Yeah.
yeah. Some people like, is it good to be in a relationship? Is this getting someone special treatment? And it's like, yes, those are all relevant questions, and that should be up whatever kind of relationship there was. Um, yeah, and you also have more non-binary representation in the High Republic specifically, which is a relatively new cultural thing that's sort of like taking place in modern day. Why I
Yeah, in
think it's heavily
comparison.
reflected. Yeah, compared to, I mean, gay and lesbian people using those words have been around for a long time. So the fact that Star Wars is just now catching up is a sign that we're doing their best to be a little more proactive, and depicting characters like might actually exist in the real world as well.
The future of Star Wars is always somewhat nebulous, where we don't know what we'll see. It seems like the Rey sequel films are put on hold now because they're waiting to see how the Mandalorian and Grogu shape up. Um, there's some Ryan Gosling uh, Starfighter film in the works, and we will still have Star Wars TV, even though it seems like it's slowed down. We have Ahsoka season 2, and I'm not sure if there's anything announced for live action, although there have been some rumblings for another Kenobi season. But no matter what the future of Star Wars holds, it's an evolving um, narrative that should be representative of the world around it.
Yeah, and what I really hope is that, yeah, we're in a political situation, and when this is being recorded in June of 2025, where specifically trans people are being marginalized and demonized. And that is terrible. And one way to combat that is by realistic and positive representation in media, and to also use the explicit language so it can't just be swept away. Like it's not like, oh, they could be read as potentially being trans. It's like, no, use that language. I now identify as a man, and I used to identify not that way,
Mhm.
as many characters have in the High Republic, and have those characters treated just like everyone else, and that happens to be part of their character. That is one of the I would say for myself, even when I was growing up, it was important to have those pieces of representation because not being a queer man myself, um, that is one thing that it's like, oh, I'm an empathetic person, and having growing up in a sheltered environment, getting exposure in the media I had was one way to uh, grow and learn about other communities.
It's what I give attention to Power Rangers for, just because I grew up in a very, very kind of secluded, non-diverse environment. So the fact that I could watch a show where people who looked like me and didn't look like me got along was incredibly helpful in learning how to be a real person in the world. Um, so to have that in any case, just to know that the world is larger than you understand is an incredible gift.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, and I think it makes sense to have Star Wars depict the full range of human experience. You can even go beyond the human experience because again, we have aliens. We have some
Yeah,
cool things in the High
Acolytes.
Republic too. There's like these are aliens that have three genders. Like get weird with it too. Like it's like you got to accept baseline human is like the normal stuff, and then you can get into the weird alien stuff. And that just makes a richer and more vibrant world. But yeah, depicting gay characters, not inherently sexual. It's appropriate for all ages. And I'm happy with the High Republic specifically for, and all the authors who I assume pushed forward potentially against some objections from maybe corporate higher ups at Disney. I'm like, nope, it is intrinsic to the story that this Padawan be trans.
Mhm. Any final thoughts on this travelogue on representation?
Just that I think, as I said, with trans characters being more prominent, I also think we're seeing a rise in positive depictions of asexual characters,
Mhm.
which are different than voluntarily celibate characters. Like, for example, Luke Skywalker after he becomes a Jedi. After that point, we never really see him express any romantic or sexual interest, but we did see him do that before he became a Jedi. But we do. There are several, openly asexual characters in the High Republic period. And I think you can read many characters, either Jedi and non-Jedi, in other areas as asexual, and that is perfectly fine for them. Yeah, and I think another very openly asexual character would be Admiral Thrawn, who's noted as not having any romantic inclinations by the other Chiss in his background trilogy,
Mhm.
which I thought was also rather well done. Where several people think he's asking him on a date, he's like, "No, we're actually going to talk about this art."
We're going to talk about this art and how we can manipulate the culture that made this art in order to subjugate them and defeat them in battle.
Yeah, just normal Chiss Academy things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this has been sort of our 2025 Pride Month review of queer representation in Star Wars. Obviously, we probably missed many either subtextual or textual relationships. Again, this was not intended to be exhaustive, but to look at the evolution from the original trilogy, where it's like, hey, maybe those droids could be read as an old married gay couple, to the modern, most recent Star Wars media in the High Republic, where the representation is both positive, frequent, affirming, and thoughtful.
And just a hopeful view of what representation could be in the future. You know, it's
Yeah,
been a
and we're
while since Star Wars has been on the big screen, so let's see what they can do.
yeah, and we're assuming that you, as cultured and understanding listeners, know why representation is so important uh, to such marginalized communities, especially given the world as it is right now. Again, it is not threatening to have representation in any way. The characters are not shoehorned into the media that they have. Um, Someone being heterosexual is not the default of the world, and these are all things to which Connor and I both ascribe.
So yes, join us next time. This was episode 90, you said, Alex? 90 of
Yes,
the Talking
90.
Star Wars? I think we have another 10 in the canon before we take a little break and do a little mini season like we did with Avatar.
Yeah, so thank you for listening through 90 episodes, and we'll talk to you soon.
We'll see you sometime soon in a galaxy right here.